Welcome back to this deep dive. Today we are walking straight into a minefield, and I really don't say that lightly.
No, we really are.
Yeah.
It's one of those topics where angels fear to tread, honestly.
We're tackling a subject that I think every single person listening right now has wrestled with, usually at, 11 p.m. in the dark, staring at the ceiling, just wondering, why is this so hard?
Yeah.
It is one of the oldest, most controversial, and honestly most loaded puzzles in the entire human experience.
It really is. It's the topic that usually generates a lot more heat than light, if we're being honest.
Exactly. We are talking about the architecture of desire, specifically the age-old question of why men and women, and we are speaking very broadly here, looking at population averages, why they often seem to have such radically different sexual needs.
Right. Different patterns of arousal, different ways of viewing intimacy altogether.
You know the classic late-night argument? It's the why do you always want it versus why do you never want it
Yeah.
dynamic.
Or the stereotypes we all grew up with, right? Like, men are simple creatures driven by biology, or
Yeah.
men are dogs.
Right, right.
And then on the flip side, women are these complex, impossible to understand riddles, or even worse, women are frigid.
Yeah, exactly. And the mission for our deep dive today is to completely dismantle those stereotypes. We want to stop the reductive debates and actually look at the machinery under the hood. Because we have pulled together a massive stack of research here. I mean, we're talking evolutionary biology, neuroendocrinology, psychology, and sociology.
And I think it's important to state up front that the goal isn't to just say, well, men are like this, women are like that, deal with it.
Right.
The goal is to understand why. Because when you look at the source material, you realize that the differences we see, they aren't because one sex is, quote unquote, more sexual and the other is less sexual.
Which is the biggest misunderstanding, I think.
It is. It absolutely is.
It's not just a volume knob issue. Like
Yeah.
one is turned up to 10 and the other is at a 4.
It's not. It's about what the research calls diverging patterns. And to understand those patterns, we really have to look at what the report calls the symphony of interaction.
I loved that analogy in the reading because usually when people argue about this, they pick one lane, right? They say, oh, it's just biology, men just have testosterone, or they swing to the other side and say, no, it's entirely society, we're just socialized this way.
And the research basically says, you're both right and you're both wrong because you're only looking at one instrument in the orchestra.
Yeah.
If you really want to understand human sexuality, you have to view it as a hierarchy of 4 distinct layers.
4 layers. Okay, so let's give you, the listener, the roadmap before we start the car because we are going to go really deep on each of these.
Sure. So at the very bottom, think of this as the basement, the foundation. We have evolutionary biology.
Okay.
This is the deep past. This is the raw survival logic that shaped our ancestors over literally millions of years.
So the why we are built this way layer.
Exactly. Then, sitting right on top of that, we have the neuroendocrine layer. This is your hardware.
The chemistry.
Right, your brain chemistry, hormones, testosterone, oxytocin. This is how that ancient evolutionary logic is actually codified in your blood right now.
Got it. And layer 3.
Above that is the psychological layer. This is the software. This is where we get into the really practical day-to-day stuff about how desire actually functions, like spontaneous versus responsive desire. It's the operating system.
And finally, the top layer.
Finally, the top layer, the one we actually see most clearly in our daily lives, is the sociocultural layer, the script.
The script.
This is what society tells us desire should look like, how we're supposed to behave.
I think that structure is just so helpful. It stops us from getting lost in the weeds.
Precisely. And for everyone listening, here is the real hook of this entire deep dive. This isn't just some academic exercise.
No.
It's not just biology trivia. Understanding these layers is the absolute key to empathy in your relationship.
Yes.
Because if you are in a relationship where there is friction around sex, and let's be honest, statistics show that most long-term relationships at some point, understanding this moves you from judgment to curiosity.
That's the crucial shift. Instead of lying there thinking, why are you doing this to me? Or
Right.
why don't you love me? You start to actually see the machinery at work.
Exactly. Why are you like this? Becomes, oh, wow, I see how your system is built. And once you see the system, you can stop fighting it and actually start working with it.
I love that. All right, let's dive in. We are going to start at the bottom, the deepest layer. Evolution.
Here we go.
Now, whenever we talk about EvoPsych, I feel like we have to put a massive disclaimer on the discussion. We are talking about history, right?
Crucial disclaimer.
Yes.
Yes, we are looking at the environmental pressures that shaped our ancestors over millions of years. back in the Pleistocene era.
Right.
We are not saying that this dictates how you should act today in the modern world.
Right. Biology is not destiny.
It's not destiny. But biology is the clay we are made of. You just can't ignore it.
So to understand sexual difference, the source material points heavily to one specific theory from 1972. It's by a biologist named Robert Travers, and it's called Parental Investment Theory.
This is the bedrock. Honestly, if you understand this one concept, almost everything else starts to make sense.
Break it down for us. What exactly is parental investment theory?
The core premise is actually very simple economic logic, just applied to biology. Travers argued that the sex that invests more in the offspring, biologically speaking, will inevitably become the choosier sex.
Because they have more on the line.
Exactly. They have more to lose.
Yeah.
Conversely, the sex that invests less will end up competing for access to that choosier sex.
It's literally supply and demand.
It is. It's entirely about risk assessment.
Okay, so let's look at the balance sheet here for humans, because biologically, it is definitely not a balanced transaction.
It is staggeringly asymmetrical. Let's play this out. Let's look at the ancestral female investment first. Imagine a woman in the Pleistocene era. If she decides to say yes to a sexual encounter and conception occurs, what is the immediate cost to her?
Well, minimally, it's 9 months of pregnancy.
Right, which is a massive metabolic cost. She is literally sharing her nutrients, her immune system is compromised, her entire body is changing. She becomes slower, physically heavier, which makes her more vulnerable to predators.
She can't just run away as fast.
No, she can't. And it doesn't end at birth.
Far from it. That's just the down payment.
Exactly. In an ancestral environment, she is the primary and often the sole source of nutrition through lactation. That could last anywhere from 2 to 4 years per child.
Wow.
And keep in mind, in the ancient world, childbirth wasn't a sanitized medical event. It was a severe life risk event. Maternal mortality was incredibly high.
Right. So a quote-unquote bad choice regarding a mate, say picking a male who had poor genetic health, or crucially, a male who would just leave immediately and not stick around to help protect her, that could literally mean death for her or for the offspring.
The stakes were absolute. There was almost zero margin for error.
Okay, now let's flip it and look at the ancestral male investment.
Biologically, if we strip away all the modern social stuff,
Yeah, just the raw biology.
it can be as brief as a few minutes.
A few minutes.
A very, very small metabolic cost to produce sperm, the act of copulation itself,
Mm-hmm.
and then, theoretically, he could just walk away.
Wow.
He doesn't have to carry the child. He doesn't have to nurse the child. The physical toll on his body is practically zero.
So purely from a biological hardware perspective, a man could theoretically reproduce with almost zero subsequent physical cost, whereas a woman is signing a multi-year, high-risk contract with significant mortality risk.
Correct. And that extreme asymmetry created completely different survival and reproductive problems for each sex to solve. And evolution selects for traits that solve those specific problems.
So let's look at the male problem first. What was the specific evolutionary pressure on men?
For ancestral men, the primary limit on their reproductive success wasn't resources, it was access to fertile partners. Since their physical investment could be so low, the most effective strategy to spread their genes, again from a purely Darwinian perspective, was to maximize the total number of fertilization events.
So quantity over quality.
In that specific context, yes. This is often referred to as the fertilization challenge. And this pressure theoretically selected for certain psychological traits that we still see clearly echoed today.
Give us an example.
For example, men generally have a much greater sensitivity to visual sexual cues
Why visuals specifically?
because you need to spot fertility quickly. Clear skin, a specific hip-to-waist ratio, youth, these are all rapid visual markers of reproductive viability. It's selected for a nervous system that can scan, identify, and become aroused very quickly.
This source material also mentions spontaneous sexual thoughts as part of this.
Right, because if your evolutionary goal is to not miss a reproductive opportunity, your brain should be scanning for those opportunities constantly.
Always on standby.
Exactly. So men, on average, report far more frequent spontaneous sexual thoughts throughout the course of a day. And it also selected for a desire for variety.
Variety. Okay, this is the Coolidge effect mentioned in the notes, right?
Yes, the Coolidge effect. The term comes from an old joke about President Coolidge, but the underlying science is very real. In almost every mammalian species studied, male arousal is intensely re-triggered by a new partner, even right after they are completely satiated or exhausted with a current partner.
So wait, a male rat will be totally exhausted, refuse to mate with the same female again, but if you drop a new female in the cage, suddenly he's ready to go.
Instantly. His refractory period vanishes. It's a biological mechanism designed to encourage spreading genes as widely as possible. And this is highly important for our human discussion. This selected for a sexuality that is somewhat separable from emotional bonding.
Meaning, for a man, sex can just be sex. It doesn't biologically require a deep emotional vetting process because the physical risk of the act is just lower.
Precisely. He doesn't inherently need to know if she's a deeply reliable person to fertilize the egg. He just needs access. Now, flip the script. What was the problem for ancestral women?
Well, like we said, she didn't need to fight for fertilization because sperm is abundant.
Sperm is incredibly cheap and everywhere. Her problem was ensuring the survival of that one, very expensive offspring. So selectivity became her primary survival mechanism. Evolution selected for women who were extremely discerning.
Discerning about what, though? If she's not just looking for visual cues like hot guys, what exactly is her brain scanning for?
She is scanning for cues of willingness to invest. She needed to look for resources, physical stability, protection, and yes, good genes. But crucially, above all, she needed to know if this guy was going to stick around to help.
So this is where the emotional connection piece comes in.
Yes, emotional connection, intimacy, demonstrated reliability, these became the absolute best proxies for that willingness to invest. Therefore, female desire evolved to be much more context-dependent.
Context-dependent, that's a key phrase for everyone listening.
It's huge. Think about it. A woman who just had spontaneous desire for every single male she saw, acting like the male strategy, would likely end up with an unsupported offspring and might not survive the harsh environment. Her desire had to be gated by a sense of safety and relational security.
So when we see these common stereotypes today, the guy who wants to sleep around and the woman who wants a commitment first, we are basically just looking at ancient survival logic playing out in a modern world.
We are. We're seeing the echoes of the fertilization challenge colliding with the resource challenge.
Yeah.
We're dealing with two completely different economic strategies that had to somehow merge to create a successful species.
But this is just the basement. This is just the deep history foundation. We have to move up to the next layer to see how this is actually built into our bodies right now. Because let's be real, you aren't walking around thinking about parental investment theory consciously.
No, absolutely not. You don't look at a guy across a crowded bar and think, I wonder if he will invest adequate caloric resources in my future offspring.
No, you just feel a vibe. Or you don't.
Right, you just feel it.
Exactly.
Right.
So let's talk about the hardware, the biological and neuroendocrine layer. How does the body actually enforce these ancient evolutionary rules?
Evolution isn't just a history lesson in a textbook, it's actively encoded in your hormones. And the big player here, the one everyone immediately thinks of, is testosterone.
The gas pedal of the sexual engine.
In many, many ways, yes.
Not yet.
Now, let's clarify something important. Testosterone is present in both men and women. It is absolutely essential for libido in both sexes.
Okay.
But men have significantly higher levels, often 10 to 20 times more circulating testosterone than women.
10 to 20 times. That is a massive physiological difference.
It's enormous. And the scientific literature is pretty clear on this. Testosterone is the primary driver of raw libido.
When you say libido here, what do you mean specifically? Because I feel like people use that word to mean everything from I deeply love my wife to I want to watch porn right now.
That's a very good distinction. In this context, I mean the spontaneous, intrusive urge for sexual release, that raw hunger feeling. Because men have this constant, very high bath of testosterone. Their baseline drive for sexual frequency tends to be higher and much more constant. It's like this hum in the background that never really goes away.
Always idling.
Always idling.
Yeah.
Whereas for women,
Right. What does that look like for women?
women have testosterone, but they also have a much more complex, shifting interplay of estrogen and progesterone that fluctuates dramatically across the entire menstrual cycle.
The menstrual modulation?
Right. It's not a flat line like the male hum. There are peaks of interest, which are often highly correlated with ovulation, the fertility window. During those specific few days, female desire might actually feel a lot more like that male pattern of spontaneous urge. They might truly feel that sudden hunger.
But for the rest of the month?
For much of the rest of the cycle, progesterone dominates, or the overall hormone levels drop significantly. The feeling becomes very different. It's cyclical, not constant. So you have a man who is waking up every day with a relatively steady hum of drive, and a woman who is experiencing a constantly shifting internal landscape.
So if a man expects his partner to just have that same steady hum every single day, he's fundamentally ignoring her biology.
He is expecting her to biologically be a man, and she's not.
Wow.
But here is where it gets really fascinating regarding how this plays out in relationships. We have to talk about neurotransmitters, specifically the fundamental difference between dopamine and oxytocin.
Dopamine is the reward chemical, right? Like the I want that chemical.
Yes, dopamine drives the seeking behavior. It's the thrill of the chase. And testosterone directly drives dopamine. But oxytocin is the bonding chemical. It's often called the cuddle hormone. It's released heavily during intimacy, during orgasm, and also during breastfeeding.
And the source material suggests this actually works differently in men and women.
There is strong evidence of a divergence here. While oxytocin is definitely released in both sexes during orgasm, it may reinforce bonding much more strongly in women.
Interesting. So the chemical glue, so to speak, is just stronger for her.
Potentially, yes. And think about the evolutionary reason for that, going back to layer 1. If a woman is going to take the massive biological risk of having sex, she needs to ensure the relational bond is real. Her biology actively helps her do this by flooding her brain with bonding chemicals that make her feel deeply attached to that specific partner.
Which creates a much tighter biological link for women between the physical act of sex itself and deep emotional vulnerability.
Exactly. For many women, and again, we are always speaking of population averages here, sex is a primary attachment behavior. It binds them.
And for men?
For men, thanks to that extremely testosterone-heavy drive and the specific way their dopamine system is wired for novelty, sex can be an attachment behavior, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it can also just be a mechanical release mechanism.
Right.
The oxytocin wash they experience might not be as potent or as lasting in the exact same way immediately after the act.
You know, that completely explains that terrible, sinking feeling so many women describe after a casual hookup.
Yes, it really does.
The guy might be getting out of bed like, that was great, high five, see ya. And she is lying there feeling incredibly vulnerable, or maybe feeling used, or suddenly feeling this deep, unexpected need for him to stay and cuddle.
And then she might harshly judge herself for that. She thinks, why am I being so clingy? We agreed this was casual. But it's not a character flaw or clinginess. Her brain just automatically released a gallon of potent bonding fluid. His brain might not have done the same thing.
That is such a huge validation for people listening right now who have felt that exact gap.
It is. It takes the shame right out of it. But we have to move out of the laboratory now. We have to talk about how this actually feels in the day-to-day, because most couples aren't sitting around fighting about their oxytocin levels.
No, definitely not. They are fighting about who initiates sex on a random Tuesday night when the dishes aren't done and the kids are screaming.
Yes, exactly. Which brings us to the transition into the psychological dimension, the software layer. And honestly, this section of the report, this blew my mind. I think this is where the most practical aha moments are for our listeners today.
I completely agree. If you take only one thing away from this entire deep dive, let it be the distinction between spontaneous and responsive desire.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. This concept comes from a researcher named Rosemary Basson, right?
Yes, Dr. Rosemary Basson. And her work was a total paradigm shift in sexual medicine. Because for a very long time, the standard medical model of sex was entirely based on the male experience. It was strictly linear.
Linear. What does that mean in this context?
It means it goes in a straight line. Step 1, you feel an internal urge. Step 2, you initiate. Step 3, you have sex. Step 4, you reach satisfaction and resolution.
Okay, so that's the hunger model we talked about. I get hungry, I find food, I eat.
Exactly. And that is what we formally call spontaneous desire. It arises completely out of the blue. It feels like this internal itch that suddenly needs scratching. It's often highly intrusive. You know, you're just sitting at your desk at work, doing a spreadsheet, you see something out the window, or you think of nothing at all, and boom, you are suddenly thinking about sex.
And statistically speaking, this pattern is much more prevalent in men.
Yes, largely driven by that constant testosterone baseline we discussed. But here is the absolute game changer. Basson pointed out that many women, and to be fair, some men as well, they just don't operate on that linear model.
Right.
They operate on what she termed responsive desire.
Please explain that difference, because I think this right here is where so many couples completely miss each other.
Okay, responsive desire means you start at neutral. You aren't hungry, You aren't actively thinking about sex at all. You might even be thinking, man, I'm really tired today. But if you sit down at the dinner table and the food smells really good and the lighting is nice and you take one small bite, suddenly your appetite wakes up. You realize, oh, I actually am hungry.
So the desire comes in response to the stimulation, not before it.
Precisely. It arises in response to context-erotic stimuli, a gentle touch, warmth, emotional connection, a good conversation.
This is huge because the friction in a relationship usually lies exactly like this. The husband, who has spontaneous desire, waits for his wife to, quote-unquote, come on to him. He's waiting for her to show that spontaneous hunger.
He's waiting for the clear signal. He thinks if she wants me, she'll jump my bones. And when she doesn't initiate out of the blue, he internalizes it and interprets it as, she doesn't find me attractive anymore. She doesn't love me. She just doesn't want sex.
But she's sitting right there on the couch thinking, I'm perfectly willing, I love you, but I'm just not hungry yet. I'm sitting at neutral. I need you to actually help me set the table so I can get there.
Exactly. Her need isn't for an initial burning urge. Her need is for a conducive context to let her arousal unfold naturally. She needs the foreplay to start way, way before they ever get to the bedroom to smoothly switch her system from neutral into drive.
That reframing is incredible. It stops the whole you never want me narrative dead in its tracks and completely changes the conversation to how do we start the engine together?
Right. It completely changes the definition of initiation. Because initiation doesn't have to mean I am incredibly horny right now. Initiation for a responsive desire person means I am open to seeing if we can get there. Let's start the process.
And to understand how to start that engine even better, we have to look at the second psychological model from the source material, which comes from the Kinsey Institute.
Yeah.
This is the dual control model.
The gas and the brakes.
I love this one. It just makes so much intuitive sense.
It does. Imagine your brain has two entirely separate systems regarding sex. The first is the sexual excitation system, or SES. That's your accelerator. That's the part of your brain that actively notices sex, that scans for erotic cues.
Okay, the gas pedal.
Right. And then you have the sexual inhibition system, or SIS. That's the brakes. That's the part of your brain that scans the environment and says, not now, it's dangerous, or not now, I'm too busy.
And everyone has both of these systems.
Everyone has both.
Yeah.
But the sensitivity settings vary wildly from person to person. However, research suggests that, generally speaking, men often have a much more sensitive accelerator. It really doesn't take much to step on their gas pedal. A quick visual, a stray thought, a brush of the arm zoom, they're accelerating.
And women.
Women, on average, tend to have a much more sensitive brake system.
Okay, what actually hits the brakes for women?
Everything. Honestly, everything. And this is so crucial to understand. For women, the brakes are intimately connected to everything happening in her environment and in her mind. Stress at work. Body image issues like, do I look bloated in this? Can I remember to lock the front door? Is the baby going to wake up crying? Are we currently in a fight about money?
So if the brakes are on because of any of those things, it literally doesn't matter how much you push the gas.
This is the critical insight for any men listening right now. Most men try to solve a lack of sex in their relationship by simply pushing the gas pedal harder.
Yeah.
They try to be more romantic, they buy flowers, they apply more pressure, more, come on, baby, more physical touching.
They are just flooring the accelerator.
But if her brakes are tightly clamped down because she's deeply stressed or feels unsafe or is still mad at you from an argument yesterday, pushing the gas just floods the engine. It doesn't work. In fact, it actually makes it worse. It creates a physical aversion.
You have to release the brakes first.
You must release the brakes.
Yeah.
Women's desire is often entirely contingent on turning off the inhibitions before turning on the excitations. This perfectly explains why relational discord kills female libido so incredibly fast. If she's mad at you or feels disconnected or doesn't trust you in that moment, the brakes are slammed to the floorboards.
Whereas a guy might be furious about an argument, but his accelerator is so sensitive that he can just bypass the brakes entirely.
Often, yes. Because his system allows him to compartmentalize. He can think, we're fighting, yeah, but makeup sex sounds great right now. The physical sex will actually fix the emotional fight.
And she's sitting there thinking, I literally cannot even look at you until the emotional fight is fully resolved.
Exactly. For her, the fight is the brake pedal.
That leads us perfectly into the idea of the erotic blueprint. The report mentions that male sexuality tends to be more object-focused or heavily compartmentalized, while female sexuality is much more narrative-driven.
Right. And again, broad strokes here, but men can often focus intensely on the pure physical sensation, the visual element, a specific body part. It's a highly focused, compartmentalized experience. This feels good right now.
And for women,
For women, it's often a completely holistic experience. It's about the story unfolding in the moment. It's deeply tied to self-image. Her brain is asking, do I feel desirable right now? Do I feel emotionally safe? Is this specific moment connecting us? Does he really see me?
so if a guy skips that narrative entirely, if he skips the emotional connection, the talking, setting the context, and goes straight for the physical body part, he's missing the actual mechanism that turns her on.
He's basically trying to drive the car without putting the key in the ignition. He's treating her responsive, narrative-driven sexuality as if it were his spontaneous, object-driven sexuality. And it fails almost every time.
All right, so let's pause for a second and look at the whole structure we've built so far.
Okay.
We've got evolution setting the deep stage, which is the investment theory. We've got biology providing the daily fuel, which is the high testosterone versus the shifting cycle. And we've got psychology determining the ignition switch, the gas versus the brakes.
That's a lot of complex layers.
It is, but we don't live in a vacuum. We live in the real world. We live in a society.
Which brings us to the fourth and final layer, the sociocultural superstructure, the script.
And this is where we really have to ask, how much of this is innate nature and how much is just what we were explicitly taught? Because from day one, we are taught a lot of things about how we are supposed to act.
It's a massive influence. Biology gives us the predisposition. It gives us the raw clay. But culture is what actively sculpts it. Culture tells us exactly how to interpret those underlying biological feelings.
Let's talk about the specific scripts we learn as kids.
Sure. Think about the playground in middle school or high school. How are young boys socialized regarding their sexuality?
It's all about assertiveness, conquest, being a stud. If you score, you're the man. You get high fives in the locker room from all your friends.
Right. Male masculinity is heavily tied to sexual access and conquest. So a man develops a need for high sexual frequency, not just because of his circulating testosterone, but to continually validate his very identity as a successful man. He internalizes a script that says, if I'm not having regular sex, am I a loser? Is something fundamentally wrong with me?
And for girls growing up, what's their script?
The script is entirely different. It's the role of the gatekeeper. It's about modesty. Don't give it away too easy. Sex is strictly for true love. And above all, don't be a slut.
So her need becomes entirely about emotional security to validate her relational integrity. She learns to ask, if I have sex without being deeply in love, am I a bad girl? If I have sex purely just for the physical pleasure of it, am I dirty?
Exactly.
Yeah.
As a society, we aggressively shame female promiscuity. Slut shaming is everywhere, while we simultaneously celebrate and encourage male promiscuity.
Right.
This creates an incredibly powerful psychological disincentive for women to ever express any natural needs for variety or casual sex. Even if she has a biological urge for it, society screams at her to suppress it.
So she creates a rigid precondition in her mind. I can only do this if it's completely safe and fully committed. That powerfully amplifies that responsive desire dynamic we talked about earlier.
It reinforces it with steel.
Yeah.
It adds a massive psychological brake pedal that society personally installed in her head.
But there is another massive cultural factor we really have to address from the reading. The report calls it the orgasm gap.
Yeah, we need to get very real about this one, because the statistics are honestly pretty dismal.
What are the exact numbers on this?
In heterosexual encounters, men reach orgasms significantly more often than women. We're talking near 95% of the time for men, versus sometimes 65% or even lower for women, especially in casual encounters.
And the report strongly argues that this isn't some sort of biological failure on the woman's part. Women aren't biologically broken.
No, not at all. It is entirely a cultural artifact. We have culturally defined the very act of sex almost exclusively as penetrative intercourse, P&V.
Which, conveniently, matches the male arousal and completion pattern perfectly. That's exactly how he finishes.
Correct. The script is built for him. But anatomically speaking, for the vast majority of women, penetrative sex alone is simply not sufficient to reach orgasm. They require direct clitoral stimulation.
Right.
But because our deeply ingrained cultural script says sex is P&V, and the moment the man finishes, sex is officially over, we've created a situation where millions of women are routinely having sex that simply isn't physically rewarding for them.
So when a woman says she doesn't want sex, maybe she just doesn't want bad sex.
Bingo. That is the single most important question a heterosexual man can ask himself.
Yeah.
Is the sex we are having actually physically good for her?
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. If you went to a restaurant and the food was consistently mediocre, and then you had to do all the dishes afterwards, how often would you eagerly want to go back to that restaurant?
Not very often. I'd probably find a convenient excuse to skip dinner entirely.
Exactly. Women have a completely valid biological need for performance-free, pleasure-focused intimacy. When that need goes consistently unmet, because the encounter is hyper-focused on the male script of finish quickly via penetration, her desire naturally, inevitably atrophies. It's just basic behavioral conditioning.
That is such a huge point. It's not a low libido problem, it's a low incentive problem.
Right. And then, as if that weren't enough, we have to layer on top of that the final cultural piece: modern stress and cognitive load.
The mental load. This has become a bit of a buzzword lately, but it fits so perfectly into the dual control brakes model we talked about.
It fits perfectly because it is the ultimate brake pedal. We live in a modern society where women are very often forced to juggle their full-time careers, the majority of the childcare, and the endless management of the household. The invisible labor.
Right, the invisible labor. Remembering the kids' birthdays, knowing exactly what size shoes everyone wears, planning the weekly dinner menu, remembering that the dog needs his heartworm medication on Tuesday.
That constant low-level hum of responsibility is pure cognitive exhaustion. It is exactly like having 50 different tabs open in your brain's internet browser at all times. And remember, the dual control model.
Yeah, the gas and brakes.
Exhaustion is a massive, incredibly potent inhibitor. It slams both feet on the brake pedal.
You literally can't feel sexy when your brain is stuck in administrator mode.
You cannot. You are in sheer survival and management mode.
So, in a modern context, a partner doing the dishes or planning the week's schedule isn't just helping out around the house. It's literally foreplay.
Is the new foreplay. Absolutely.
Okay.
Equitable sharing of domestic and emotional labor actually becomes a primary sexual need for women in long-term relationships because it creates the vital space for desire to even emerge.
Wow.
When you take over a chore, you are literally taking your foot off her psychological brake pedal. You are closing 10 of those open tabs in her brain's browser so she can finally focus on you.
That perfectly connects everything together. If she's fundamentally exhausted because of society, her brakes are clamped down because of psychology, and she inherently needs a relaxed context to feel desire because of her biology and evolution, then doing the laundry really is the sexiest thing you can do.
In that specific context, yes, because
Right.
it sends a very clear signal to her nervous system. I am a reliable partner. You are safe here. You can finally relax. And deep relaxation is the absolute prerequisite for arousal in the female responsive model.
We have covered so much ground here. But before we wrap up the deep dive, I want to bring in one more lens from the research to kind of synthesize all this. The report mentions the work of David Buss and evolutionary psychology regarding short-term versus long-term mating strategies.
Yes, this is a really important caveat to end on because it shows that men and women aren't wildly different all the time. It really depends heavily on the specific goal of the interaction.
Okay, so let's look at short-term mating first. This is the casual hookup, the quick Tinder date.
This is where the behavioral gap between the sexes is the absolute widest. This is where all those extreme stereotypes we talked about come from.
Right.
In a short-term mating scenario, men following that ancient ancestral fertilization strategy tend to lower their standards significantly. Their primary need in that moment is simply opportunity. They want high variety, quick physical arousal, and they apply much lower criteria. They're far less picky about the person's intelligence or status or personality if the goal is just for tonight.
And women in that same short-term scenario.
Women, even in completely casual short-term scenarios, tend to heavily maintain their higher standards. Why? Because the ancient biological risk pregnancy, STDs, physical safety, is still functionally higher for them. Her psychological brake pedal is still actively working, evaluating the risk.
So the gap is huge there. But what about long-term mating?
This is the really good news. When men and women shift their goal to looking for a committed partner, a spouse, a life partner, that massive gap narrows significantly. The criteria actually converge.
So we basically both want the same things in the end.
Mostly, yes. When you look at the extensive data gathered across multiple global cultures, both sexes highly prioritize the exact same traits for long-term bonds: kindness, intelligence, reliability, and emotional stability.
So we really aren't from completely different planets after all.
Not at all. Not when we are fundamentally trying to build a life together. Now, There are nuanced statistical differences. Men historically place a slightly higher premium on youth and beauty, which are ancient fertility cues. And women historically place a slightly higher premium on status or ambition, which are provisioning cues.
Right.
But broadly speaking, we're desperately looking for the exact same safe, reliable partnership.
That is incredibly reassuring, honestly.
It is. These stark differences we've spent the hour talking about, the high testosterone hum, the spontaneous versus responsive desire, those are just most visible in the early stages of a relationship, in the casual dating market, or the specific mechanical negotiations of the bedroom.
Yeah.
But the core underlying human need for deep connection is universally shared.
Okay, let's wrap this up. We've been through the 4 massive layers, this entire symphony.
Hierarchy of interaction.
Let's quickly recap them one last time for the room.
Sure. Layer 1.
Sure.
Evolution created the basic asymmetry, the chooser versus the chaser, the investor versus the fertilizer.
Layer 2.
Neurobiology hardwired that evolutionary drive into our bodies. Testosterone provides the constant, steady hum for men. The menstrual cycle and oxytocin create the shifting, context-dependent flow for women.
Layer 3.
Psychology individualized how that hardware runs. That gives us spontaneous versus responsive desire, the gas pedal versus the brakes.
And finally, layer 4.
Culture actively scripted the expression of all of this. It gave us slut-shaming, it created the orgasm gap, and it burdens us with the mental load.
That is an incredibly complex architecture. It's a very intricate machine.
It is, and it's amazing we navigate it at all.
So for the listener who is sitting in their car or maybe at the gym right now, what is the ultimate so what here? How do they take all this theory and actually use it tonight in their own home?
The so what is that you fundamentally have to stop viewing these biological and psychological differences as a deficit.
Deficit.
Right. If your wife has responsive desire, she isn't broken. She isn't maliciously withholding intimacy from you. She just functions on a different operating system. And conversely, if your husband has high spontaneous desire, he isn't a beast. He isn't shallow or uncaring. He's just running on a completely different biological fuel.
It's basically about translation.
It's entirely about translation, and it's about complementary problem solving.
Give me a really concrete example of that.
Okay, if you are a man and you know she needs her brake pedal released before her gas pedal can even function, you completely change your strategy. You don't just grab her in the kitchen and expect instant arousal.
Right.
Instead, you ask, hey, what is on your mind today? What can I actively take off your plate right now? You start focusing intensely on the context of the evening, not just the physical act itself.
And for her, how does she translate his behavior?
If you are a woman, and he often needs physical connection first in order to feel deep emotional closeness, because that's literally how his bonding system is wired, you start to view his initiation attempts very differently.
It reframes it.
Completely. It's no longer just him nagging you for sex because he's horny. You see it as him actively reaching out for emotional connection, just speaking in the specific language his body knows.
It moves the entire goal of the relationship from winning the late-night argument to hacking the system together.
Exactly. You navigate the differences with genuine knowledge, mutual respect, and shared intention. You stop fighting the underlying biology, and you start consciously designing a relationship that actually accommodates both operating systems.
I absolutely love that. And I want to leave the listener with one final thought that really, really stuck with me from the end of the report. It's a bit of a provocation.
Go for it.
We spend so much of our lives acting out these specific cultural scripts. The tough guy who always wants it, the good girl who acts modest, the deeply tired, overworked parent. But if we could somehow strip away all the cultural shaming, and if we stripped away the sheer cognitive exhaustion of modern life, do we actually know what our true biological needs really are? Or are we all just unconsciously acting out the roles we were taught?
That is the ultimate question. And I suspect underneath all the exhaustion and all the scripts, we are a lot more compatible than we think we are.
Definitely something to mull over tonight. Thank you so much for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next one.